Rape as a Weapon of War and Genocide. Next on Carpe Diem. Sexual violence and gender-based crimes are not coincidental to war and conflict. They can't be explained away as boys will be boys or women are the spoils of war. It's clear that rape and other sexual crimes are frequently a tactic, even a strategy of genocide. Hello, I'm Muhamed Sacirbey. Welcome to Carpe Diem. Joining me today is Carol Rittner, Distinguished Professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Richard Stockton College of New Jersey, and editor of the book, Rape, Weapon of War and Genocide. Also joining us is Lauren D'Imperio, a student at Montclair State University School of Communication and Media, and a member of the class that I teach here in digital diplomacy. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very briefly, Professor, why has it taken so long for both law and popular culture to realize that women are not just the coincidental victims of conflict, but in fact, they are frequently the targets? They are the means by which genocide is committed against a society.
Well, of course, I could direct that question back to you because men have basically controlled popular culture and law. And so we really have to say, why haven't men paid attention to what has happened to women? But I think although sexual crimes have happened from time immemorial, I think that that we have focused attention on this in the last 20 years. I think largely because of what happened in the Balkans and the attention the media gave to the so-called rape camps, to the testimonies of women coming out of former Yugoslavia. I mean, Roy Gutman, as you know, was very instrumental in bringing attention to this horrific crime to the Western world. But when you say, why has it taken so long?
Well, let me just interject here. I mean, when we watch films from 20, 30, 40 years ago, we see women in conflict as the weeping mothers, the widows who are generally mourning for their husbands. We sometimes tend to see women being attacked by the victors of a conflict, but rarely have we seen victims as actually the targets. So there's been a popular projection of women as coincidental. Is that because we men made the movies, or is it because there was maybe a glorification of war itself?
Well, I think there probably has been a glorification of war, but I also think that there was a certain reticence among women themselves to talk about what had happened to them. And
because they're not seen as a warrior, they're seen just purely as a victim.
As victims. But I mean, it's embarrassing. I hate to use the word shameful because anyone who's been raped should not be shamed. The shame should be on the person who committed the crime. But I think it is very tough. And we women especially have been acculturated not to talk about such things as sexual experience, even terrible experiences, publicly.
Well, that's because society used to see rape in whatever context as a crime of passion. But we know now that it's a crime of violence.
It's absolutely a crime of violence and domination.
And it's a crime now that's also committed as part of genocide, as part of conflict, as part of defeating a whole people.
Well, and as I said, I mean, rape has happened, as we know, from time immemorial. We can go back to the Hebrew scriptures and read about armies pillaging and raping women and taking women as trophies. But I think it is since the 70s, the 80s, and particularly into the 90s, and with the horrific crimes committed in former Yugoslavia and then in Rwanda, where it wasn't, if I could say, just rape. It wasn't just, as you said, we can no longer say, well, boys will be boys. I mean, we had Soviet generals. We had Stalin after World War II, when he was told about his soldiers widely raping in Germany as the war was coming to an end. And basically he said, that's not exactly these words, but, well, boys will be boys. I mean, you can't forbid them to have their pleasures. The French, there was a French general who actually promised his soldiers, as they were coming up from the south at the defeat of Germany, that they would have these trophies of women. So, you know, men who have controlled the media, who have controlled popular culture, men have kind of like poo-hooed this crime. And it's only, I think, because of increased awareness on the part of women that women have become braver to speak out and say this is wrong. And I think some men's consciousness about the dignity of women, that we are human beings and that human rights are women's rights, or women's rights are human rights, that we have begun to give attention. Lawyers, for example, I mean, there just weren't laws. I mean, World War II, the Nuremberg war crimes trials, nobody was tried for the crime of
crimes
rape.
against
women. In Tokyo, the Tokyo war crimes trials, there was mention of what happened to some Australian nurses, and there was some mention about these so-called comfort houses that the Imperial Japanese Army established all up and down the Chinese coast, in Taiwan, in the Philippines, and in other parts of Japanese-occupied the Pacific area. But no one was charged with these crimes. I mean, they were charged with crimes against humanity, they were charged with war crimes, but women, it just was not seen as a crime. I mean, it's only in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and of course more currently, that we have lawyers, men and women, but people like Catherine McKinnon and others who have really brought to our attention and pushed.
You mentioned Catherine McKinnon, and as ambassador and foreign minister of Bosnia, I worked with her in actually bringing several women from Bosnia who sought the protection of the U.S. courts to not prosecute, but at least to gain compensation for the crimes committed against them by ultra-nationalist Serbians under the command of Radovan Karadzic. So they actually sued Radovan Karadzic in U.S. courts. So we can say that U.S. courts...
Did they win?
Yeah, they won, but they never collected anything, unfortunately. It was two different sets of women. And in this way, even the international community played, I think, an unfortunate role, because they kept saying, well, what Radovan Karadzic did doesn't necessarily mean that Republika Srpska, the ultra-nationalist Serbs, did this. So in some ways, we again defined it as a more personal crime.
Right.
And I think it's important that we define gender-based crimes, crimes against women, as crimes that are also committed by regimes and states. In fact,
well, may I interrupt? You know,
please.
I think we should know, and you might want to get in on this conversation
Absolutely.
as well, but we should know that it's not just women
exactly
who are the victims of sexual violence.
I agree.
Overwhelmingly, it's women and girls, but there are men who,
Yes.
and so you have to ask yourself, I ask you as a man, why haven't men spoken out more about these atrocities that have been directed against them? And we know that that was the case in former Yugoslavia during
That's
the conflicts there, also in Rwanda and in other places in parts of Europe, Chechnya, in Africa, and other places where men have been violated sexually. And so I have to say, well, how come you guys don't talk about this? Why hasn't this become an issue that is increasingly on the public agenda?
I think, again, the issue of quote-unquote shame or being a victim. We may have empathy or even sympathy for the victim, but generally Western society, most societies, do not respect the victim. And I think it's important that legality has evolved in a way to give the victim empowerment, to allow the victim to be treated as a warrior and someone who can seek justice and seek it in a way that
But I
gives-
would say there's still a poo-hooing
Absolutely.
on the part. What
And
you
I
need to
think-
jump in here.
I think that men also want to be respected, and they have some sort of pride about them, and like to admit that they were a victim.
That they were
of
so
rape or
powerless.
Exactly, because like to be raped, you have to be powerless, and to admit that to someone,
Well,
to
but
them
that-
would
but
be like a
that's-
loss of like.
But that's
Pride.
exactly, I think, the point of how legality should address this, and frankly, popular culture, is that the victims are somehow empowered, that they no longer are projected as helpless. Because again, if we go back to films from 30, 40, 50 years ago, if you see victims of rape, of course, mostly in those instances women, they are just screaming, and they are somewhere in a corner just seeking to hide and forget. And here, to prosecute that crime, you can't forget. You may be able to forgive, but you cannot forget, which means you have to go into a court and testify. And I think that was one of the great contributions of the ex-Yugoslav tribunal, the ICTY, is that for the first time, actually, women did come to courts.
But imagine the courage
Absolutely.
it took for those women. I mean, because in Rwanda, former Yugoslavia, other parts of the world, for a woman to lose her virginity, for a woman to be the victim of rape, it's blamed on the woman in many instances. Husbands leaving the women, I don't want you, you're violated, you're spoiled. I mean, so it's more than just popular culture, but it's like, how are people socialized, both men and women? And what encourages or what prohibits women from speaking out, or men who have been violated? I mean, even how men have been acculturated in terms of what is it to be a man?
Well, I think here we have to, as part of culture, we have to take into consideration religion. You are a nun, a sister
I
of
am.
the Sisters of Mercy. My name is Muhammad, so it's obvious at least what my traditional background is. Lauren, you're also a practicing Catholic. But let's even take back to the Old Testament. We have in there provisions that would seem to somehow okay genocide because the Promised Land was acquired through, in effect, wiping out a previous occupant.
Well, we could also say this country was established by wiping out previous occupants as
That's
well.
correct. That's correct.
But I think.
But coming back to how we treat today that crime in the Muslim world, it's still unfortunately seen as a shame on a woman, and I think.
I mean, and it is so angering to me personally when I read in the newspaper about women, well, about men. Now, we're not talking necessarily about war, but in places like India, where a woman has been raped, and the men go scot-free. I mean, it's only within the last literally months that men are being put on trial and held accountable for these crimes. So, so much of this, the issue of rape, of sexual violence, has to do also with not just with what happens in wartime, but with what happens in peacetime. How are women treated? How are they valued? How are they respected or not respected in peacetime? I mean, men don't suddenly, become hostile to women in war if they haven't been hostile in peacetime.
Well, yeah, I think you're at least in part right. Part of the question, though, is do men seem to take a special license in war due to the notion of patriotism?
Well, I don't know if it's the notion of patriotism, but let's face it. I mean, in wartime, all of the normal barriers of civilization fall.
Right.
And I mean, men and perhaps women too, who are soldiers, they get pumped up and like, well, what happens to a person who feels like I can do what I want, where I want, with what I have,
Well,
and who's going to hold me accountable?
Massacres have been done in this country. They've been done in other countries in the name of my nation, my God, and I think we need to counter that.
Absolutely.
psychology.
Lauren, you wanted to jump in here.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to go back to what you said about how men and women act during peacetime as opposed to how they act in war. And I think that in like past generations and like thousands of years ago, like men have seen women as more of objects. More
Well, they're
than,
my
you know,
property. It's my wife, my woman, my property.
Absolutely, and that's
And
I
my
think,
honor, by the way, which is
yeah.
one of the reasons that women were targeted, because it was viewed also as somehow damaging their honor. I'm sorry, Lauren.
no, it's okay, and I think that's where like men or like the people who commit these crimes, not saying that it would be a man or a woman, but saying that they're justified in doing what they're doing because, you know, my property, I can do what I want.
Exactly. And you know, and it's not only that the man is dishonored, but he can't protect his women.
Right.
You know, I mean, so, and this all has to do with what are men supposed to be able to do? To protect their property. Women are part of their property, or, you know, and they can't protect them.
Well, it seems funny that in the chess of warfare, the women are the pawns, where on the actual chessboard, the queen is the most powerful piece. But
Oh,
the reality is that women have been seen as pawns, and
Well,
really at the end game.
the other thing is, I have a colleague at Stockton, Elisa von Jürgen-Forgy, who talks about these gender-based crimes as life force crimes. So think about women, and first of all, think about a patriarchal society. And former Yugoslavia, Rwanda, other countries are patriarchal societies. A child gets his or her ethnic heritage background from the father. So even if, for example, in former Yugoslavia, if the wife is a Roman Catholic Croat, but the person who impregnates her is a Serbian Orthodox Christian man, your heritage comes through the father, your ethnic heritage. Or if it's a Bosnian Muslim woman and it's a Roman Catholic Croat man who impregnates the woman, it's not, you don't get your ethnic heritage through your mother, it's through the father. Same thing in Rwanda during the 1994 genocide there and in other places. If a Hutu impregnated a Tutsi woman, he's making Hutu babies. So this life force, there's a destruction of the ethnic community that's also happening.
Well, actually coming back to this issue of rape and religion, another complex question is, what do you do once a woman is impregnated? That's different from a man being sexually violated.
Absolutely.
We had a crime, we defined it as a crime, called enforced pregnancy during the Bosnian conflict. And we, as a representative of Bosnia, really did not have a formal position on it. But my view was that a woman should have all choices open to her simply because they're empowering. Not because she should get an abortion necessarily, but because she should never feel that she's obliged to do anything as a consequence of that crime. And as a result, many women did have abortions. Many actually did bear the children. Some gave them up. And some actually took them in as in fact, they're part of their family. And even the fathers took them in as part of that family. What do you think, as someone who is a Catholic nun and someone who is a scholar and who has written a book on rape as a weapon of war and genocide?
Well, it's not one of the easier questions.
I didn't mean it to be.
It's a very complex, difficult issue. I hope nobody ever comes to me personally and says, what should I do? Quite honestly, I mean, intellectually, I'd say I'm opposed to abortion. I'm opposed to it. Not just because I'm a Roman Catholic Christian, I'm a Sister of Mercy, a member of the Sisters of Mercy. I mean, from everything we know from neonatal science, the child is, I just saw a, what are they called, those little scans that they have of a 10 weeks old, sonogram, 10 weeks old. I couldn't believe a recognizable child. So it's very complex. But then
Well,
we also have to take into consideration the person,
Right.
the circumstances. I mean, listen, it is a very, very difficult question. I wish I could tell you I have a, never do this or always do that or whatever. I would want to support the woman. I certainly don't want to see innocent life be destroyed. I don't know what I would do
Well,
if I were impregnated and had to give birth and for 9 months, and not only just for 9 months, for the rest of my life. Maybe to face that child, to remember that maybe I wouldn't even know who the father of the child is.
Well, let me take you back, actually, during the Rome Conference, where the International Criminal Court
Right.
was established, and we really haven't talked that much about it. The whole issue of gender-based crimes almost fell apart because certain Catholic countries, including the Vatican, and certain conservative Muslim countries viewed the whole packaging of gender-based crimes as somehow potentially empowering abortion, empowering even things like contraception. So I'm not, I think I know what I would advise, regardless of my views on abortion, as you would. If I faced a woman, would be, please try to treat that child as an innocent and potentially contributor to the human race, not as someone who's come together by bad genes from a bad father. But as the whole issue of empowering, you come back to this issue not of what you would personally advise a woman. What do you think it's okay to say that one of the options should be to terminate a pregnancy? I know.
That's a very, very dicey issue. I'm not sure I would say it's okay. I would say that maybe, I think there's so many circumstances. I mean, if it's just a question of I was forcibly impregnated with a child, with a baby that I really don't want, therefore
Right.
have an abortion, that's too simple.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not avoiding your question. I honestly don't know. I mean, just to say, well, it's okay.
Right.
That's like saying, no, I don't want to make any analogies. They always limp.
Yeah,
but Lauren, what do you think?
I was actually just gonna interject how I feel about it. I've never been in the situation, so obviously I
Right.
if it were to come down to me, I don't know what I'd do. I'd probably cry and sob for a while. But really, I think what I would do if I had a friend that was in the situation, I would be there for them and support their decision. I am pro-life, and I am a Roman Catholic.
But
So-
even if you're not a Roman Catholic, you're just a human being.
Absolutely.
But I mean, on all of these decisions, I think
Right.
we have to think about the human being, both the human being that is developing and the human being who is made to, that it's her womb, that it's
Right.
carrying this child. I mean,
let me
to
take-
just be intellectual about it and say, I would always do this, or I would always do that, it's too inhumane or something.
Absolutely.
I would agonize with the woman, and I would do.
I think we're agonizing here, which actually I don't want to let time pass by.
Yeah, okay.
Because Carol, your history, your personal history, is really interesting here. It's a great contribution to the subject, not just of rape as a crime of war, but the whole issue of genocide. That's the subject you teach
Right.
at Richard Stockton. Can you give us just very briefly how you came about the distinguished roles that you've had? As I understand, you've been the director of the Elie Wiesel Institute and many
Right.
other roles.
Well, as you know, I'm a Sister of Mercy, and for quite a long time, for coming into 52 years. So
Congratulations.
thank you. So when I was a very young sister. I was after my initial formation. I read the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, and of course I was young and zealous. I was about 23, 24 years old, and I was just beginning my teaching career in high school when I read this book, and I'm thinking to myself, what happened to the Christians? Why didn't they help these Jews who were being rounded up by the Nazis and put into concentration and death camps? And so it's like, what happened to love one another, do unto others as you would have them do to you, etc. And it's that question, where were the Christians during the Holocaust and what was happening to the Jews, that really propelled me to study much more and to read much more. And so I did, and I discovered the underside to Christian theology, which for centuries, for millennia, has been anti-Jewish, and up until Vatican Council II. I'm a Vatican Council II nun, so I love this new Pope, you know. I just hope he puts his words into action on some issues. So I studied and I learned, and I determined I was going to do what I could based on Vatican II and its the new approach to Jews and to persons of other religious traditions or no religious tradition, to put the church into the world, to be of service to the world. In any event, I met Elie Wiesel when I was in Detroit, and I had an idea for various projects, and he was very supportive. And after I finished my doctorate, this was after I finished my doctorate, and so Elie asked me to be the head of his foundation. And
Carol, that's a good place to stop.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time.
Okay.
And I'd just like to highlight that you actually share something with Angelina Jolie.
Right.
She's been much of an activist on this whole issue, and this June, together with the Foreign Minister of the UK, William Hague,
yes,
she's going to be hosting a conference on sexual crimes and warfare. So Angelina Jolie and Professor Carol Rittner and William Hague and the rest of us. If you'd like to check out the Montclair Diplomat Class blog on the Huffington Post website, you can visit the address on your screen, www.huffingtonpost.com/Montclair-diplomats. For more about Carpe Diem, you can write to us at the email address on your screen, carpediem@mail.montclair.edu, or call us at 973-655-5158. For Carpe Diem, I'm Mo Sacirbey, and thank you for watching, and thank you for these wonderful guests.